Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy A14 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, this phone just came out last year, which was very interesting because it came out right before the Samsung Galaxy S23, and I really felt like in a lot of different ways, this phone really was very similar to an S23. It reminded me a lot of it, I don't know why. Not necessarily like this phone is not at the same level of the S23, but I do think some of the design language that Samsung threw in inside of this phone reminisced me a lot about the S23 that came out right after this thing, which is pretty funny, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, I don't think I would recommend buying the Galaxy A14 if your budget is like $200. I think you can definitely go up to something like a Samsung Galaxy S21 for around $200 to $300 and get a way better phone. So I will leave some of those phones linked down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy A14, this particular phone on the front has a 6.6-inch PLS LCD panel on the front. It's 1080p and it's an overall really good looking panel. It's a good looking panel for the age of this phone and the type of phone it is. It's 1080p. I mean, it's not an OLED display or anything like that, which can be kind of a downside for some people. It's also their Infinity V display, so it has quite a bit of bezel around it, comparatively for a phone nowadays. But I also don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. It's a pretty average type of phone. It's a pretty average looking device when it comes down to it. And that's just kind of what happens when you're getting these types of devices, right? When you're getting these types of phones, you're getting phones that just are a little bit older, that may not necessarily look like the best of all time. And that's what their A series is all about. Now, I would also say with this particular phone, there's not really much else that you're kind of getting here. I mean, it's a pretty basic panel. There's not like any flagship features going on with this particular phone that we haven't already seen before. So I will tell you from that particular perspective as well, pretty average type of experience, but I do get it and I do think it's totally fine in a lot of different ways. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there. A good thing design-wise about this phone is that you are getting kind of flat sides around it. So that is something that's actually kind of cool. For you having to just kind of go through and just kind of use these flat sides, it's actually kind of nice. You don't have to go through and have a phone that feels super, super outdated. So this thing kind of has an advantage from that particular perspective too. Now on top of that, you are getting USB Type-C on the bottom of this particular phone, which is another cool thing. I love USB-C. This thing, although, it doesn't have the most amount of features with that's USB-C port, like no Samsung DeX or anything, it's still kind of nice to have, and I do think that is a really cool feature going on for this particular device from that perspective. Now, it does have a micro SD card slot, which is another really cool thing. So I will tell you, having expandable storage inside of a device is really, really important, and that is something that you are getting on this, type of phone. So this in and of itself, again, is another really good feature going on for this particular device, which is something I love a lot. So personally for me, I look at this type of device on the Galaxy A14, on the sides, on the bottom, so far, so good. The backside though was the very interesting thing. So clearly this phone looks a lot like the Galaxy S23, and this is the thing that threw me off the most. I was looking at this particular phone and I was like, you know what? I mean, it's very interesting, don't get me wrong, but I did kind of feel like that Samsung kind of put some interesting things with this particular phone, which is very, very interesting. Like the back of this phone wasn't, glass, it was like plastic completely. But I think the way it looked was very, very interesting. Like they really just threw in kind of like the Galaxy S23 type of design on this thing on the back, which is funny. It's a pretty big phone. It is a bigger phone overall than the S23, but it is what it is. It was just like a funny thing going on with this particular phone that I was kind of thinking about at the time. But still, I will tell you, on the outside of the A14, pretty good looking phone nonetheless. It's a budget phone, but it really isn't that terrible. And I do think that's a pretty interesting thing going on for this particular device at the end of the day. So that right there kind of gets a thumbs up for me. Now, on top of that, camera-wise, this phone is giving you a triple camera setup on the backside. But the thing is that with these particular phones, you kind of have to think about there's really not anything on these particular devices that I would look at and I'd be like, okay, this camera is comparable to really any Samsung Galaxy S phone from the last 4 or 5 years. And this type of phone, I mean, it's a 50 megapixel wide, 5 megapixel ultra wide, then a 2 megapixel macro lens. This is, like I said before, it's a pretty average type of camera, and even saying average is kind of nice. I mean, this is a pretty outdated camera when it comes down to it, and this phone just came out last year. For it already being an outdated camera, and it just came out, is pretty crazy. But that's kind of what happens when you're getting these types of phones. I mean, it's a very, very outdated type of camera already, and even the ultra-wide sensor just really isn't that great. The macro lens is pretty much useless. So you're pretty much stuck in this phase where it's really not even that great of a camera, and it's just an older type of phone. You're not even getting 4K capability on the front or the back. It is strictly 1080p, which again can be kind of an annoying thing and can be kind of an issue for a lot of people. Like if I'm going through and if I'm getting some sort of phone, I definitely want it to, be a better, longer lasting phone than this thing. And this thing just really isn't lasting that long from that particular perspective. So that right there can be another kind of a big issue for some people. So I'll tell you, the camera, of this particular phone really isn't even that great here either, which again, it's kind of an annoying thing. Like if you're getting a phone, you probably want it to be lasting a little bit longer camera wise. And this thing's camera just really isn't that great when it comes down to it. So that right there is another big thing to kind of keep in mind as well. Now on top of that, software wise, this phone is kind of stuck in this really weird phase too. So it is on One UI, which is nice, but it's One UI Core 5, so it's like a different type of One UI experience. It's not like One UI 13, One UI or One UI 6, One UI 5. It's not like that. It is somewhat, once again, a limited version of One UI that you're getting on these types of devices. And once again, I would hate for me to like recommend a phone to people if it's already going to be kind of outdated in a lot of different ways too. And this software, I mean, yes, it's going to be supported for a little bit of time, but it's not really going to be this like long lasting phone. And that is kind of the problem. Like you're going to be getting, once again, kind of a limited version of software on this particular device too. And like, that's just kind of another issue with this phone. And that's, again, the problems that you're getting with these types of phones. Like you're getting kind of a limited experience. And I would hate for me to go and recommend a phone to people once again, if it's going to be kind of giving you like somewhat of a weirder software experience. So that right there is kind of another big thing to keep in mind as well. Now, on top of that, the performance of this phone really wasn't that great either. This thing has the MediaTek Helio G80, chipset inside, or the Exynos 850 in some areas, with 4 or 6 gigabytes of RAM. Even if you get the 6 gigabyte of RAM option, I'm going to be honest, it really isn't that great here either. That's kind of the issue that you're getting with these types of phones. Like if you're going through and if you're getting these types of devices, like these types of cameras, these types of performance, it just really isn't that great anymore. And that is the problem that you're getting with these types of phones. Like I would not want to recommend a phone to people if it's already going to be outdated and the performance of this phone really isn't that great either. So I look at these types of phones from a lot of different perspectives, and I'm like, if you have the option to, I mean, the performance of this phone, it gets the job done in a lot of different ways. Like it's perfectly fine and everything like that. But if you're wanting a better performing device, this thing is not going to be giving you like a solid experience. It definitely is going to be giving you a slower type of phone, and the games and apps and everything that you play on it is also going to be kind of a limited experience as well. So kind of keep that in mind. And to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll definitely tell you is I look at a phone like the Samsung Galaxy A14 and I just don't really think this phone is necessarily worth buying anymore. Like this thing literally just kind of bought, like this thing just came out. So it's funny to say this phone's not worth buying even though it's barely a year old, but that's just kind of what happens when you're getting these types of phones, right? It's an older type of device, and that's just kind of what happens when you get these types of phones. I mean, they're just already outdated by the time you buy them. Once you go up to like the A50 series, I think that's a little bit better. But this phone, in my personal opinion, really isn't worth buying. And if you can spend a little bit more money, I'd recommend buying something like the Galaxy, A50 or something like that over this thing without a doubt. So that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.